another episode of VM End to End, a show where you have a VM skeptic and a VM enthusiast come together, hash out all things cloud, compute related. Brian, thank you so much for being here today. I've got some questions for you.
Hello. I'm excited today. Databases and VMs, it's my happy place. And because of that, I wanted to bring in Gabe Weiss, who's one of our colleagues, an expert in databases. Hi, Gabe.
Hey, everybody.
Yes, happy to get into it. I guess I'm just going to dive right in if that's cool. I want to know, when it comes to data on the cloud with compute and whatnot, why not just let a managed service run it for me magically? Why would I want to run the database level at the compute level? Like, why does that make sense?
I mean, why not indeed, right? The DevRel answer that we always give, it depends. There is nothing wrong with running a database on a VM in the cloud. Let's be clear right away. Cloud SQL, which is our relational database managed offering, it runs in a VM. So whether you're running in your VM or our VM, you're still running in a VM. The difference is, and why you might want to run your own, is really comes down to one of requirements. If you have a legacy system, you've got an application you've been running forever, and it has a set of requirements, then a managed database might not satisfy those. One of the things with managed databases is we manage it for you, which means we restrict what you can do with it, right?
Okay, so let's be specific. What are the kinds of things that might push you into kind of running it yourself on a VM?
Right. So, I bring up, like, if you've got this legacy system, if you've got an application that you've been running for, a couple of decades, it builds up over time. What you add to it when you have requirements, what you need. So a real good concrete example of this is take like SQL Server. One of the big things with SQL servers are stored procedures. You've got these methods that run on the database itself. Stored procedures have certain requirements sometimes, like maybe they require a super user. If you're running on a managed database, we don't give you a proper super user because we have this, we have to protect the database for you. We have an SLA, a service level agreement, where we guarantee that the database is going to be up all the time for you, right? Like you hear some people talk about the nines. The nines is your sort of percent of how much uptime we guarantee. Cloud SQL, for example, our managed offering is 99.95% available, 3.5 nines, which means it's like 20 minutes of downtime a month or something like that. So with these extensions or the stored procedures, we have to guard that uptime, which means we don't give you everything. So if you've got a system that requires that, a managed system might not work for you.
Okay. That actually makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate you for bringing in that perspective. So now my question is, what about someone that maybe doesn't have their database in the cloud yet, but they're thinking about switching over? What's the process for that?
Right. So, you're talking about, like, we call it the green field, where new application, a new company that's thinking, like, where should I put my stuff? Everything's moving to the cloud. Like, let's be clear. This what we're seeing in the industry, right, is everyone wants their data in the cloud for a whole host of reasons. You want to run analytics on your data. You've got a global situation where you've got an application that needs global access. You're going to be in the cloud. So I always say, if you haven't got something already, start with the managed service, right? You don't want to set up all of the boilerplate stuff that you're going to have to do to run your own database. The hardware management, all the operating system and security updates, managing the database health itself, doing all, making sure that the machine is healthy. With a managed service, all of that's handled for you. You don't have to do any of that stuff. So if you're starting fresh, absolutely start with a managed service.
Well, you just said it right there. You're kind of, I love it when you're starting a new project and you get to like set everything up from scratch, but a lot of us are dealing with a lot of software that already exists. Like, what do you do in that scenario?
So if you've got one of those legacy systems, like I said, right, like the 20-year application you're working with, there's a few different ways you could do it. If your systems are all really tightly integrated and you've got it running in like a tight cluster of machines or something, you can just do that, the lift and shift, right? Just take the entire thing, throw it up in a VM, and now instead of running in your closet, you're running in our closet. But we handle all of the machine health for you. So that's absolutely a valid strategy. If you need to get out of where you're at and get to the cloud first, just put everything in a VM and get going. You do want to split the data out though, right? So strategically speaking, if your requirement is get to the cloud first, do that. Lift and shift up, then start working on splitting off your data. There are cases though where that might not be the case. If you've got an application that for compliance reasons or other, you have to have the application local, but your data has now grown beyond where it can handle, and you need to just get the data out. Splitting the data out is totally fine too, but there's some problems there, right? So the internet's a problem, right? So if you are in a situation where you want to keep your application, but you need to move the data, that's fine, but you should be aware that you'll have to handle that on the application side. So great connection to your data center. Maybe you've got a 30 millisecond ping time round trip, right? If you're running locally, your ping to your database is less than a millisecond for a really well-tuned relational database. So all of a sudden your time's 30. But it's not even that kind, because let's say, for example, you're only allowing SSL connections to your database. The TLS handshake to establish that connection takes 2 round trips back and forth to establish the handshake before you get to the data. So now it's not 30 milliseconds to get your answer. It's 100 milliseconds to get your answer.
And then a bunch of apps like make a bunch of queries in a row, and so that just like every one of those extends it out. So what should people do in that kind of, like, what do you do about that?
I mean, you can't fix the internet. The internet you're kind of stuck with. But the tons of connection, the queries that you talked about, right? Some applications, because they're used to this quick turnaround time, they'll just spin up a connection, ask their question, shut down the connection. If you do that at a couple hundred times and your round trip is now not so quick, that's going to like wreck your responsive UI. So instead, the first thing that I tell people is the first thing you want to do is what we call client-side connection pooling. Most libraries that you connect with, so there's like, for Python, we recommend SQL Alchemy is a great library to use for connecting to your relational databases. There's objects that you use to create the connection, and there's a connection object, and there's a pool object. That pool is a connection pool that will establish, it hands you a connection to the database and it holds it open for whatever you specify. That means if you're making these like hundreds of queries, every second, that's great. It'll establish one connection, run all your queries until there's some idle time, then shut it down. So that cuts down your round trip time, because the round trip time for that security is only on that initial connection. And then after that, you're good to go.
Right. This is really interesting to me because, I like that you said earlier, if you're starting greenfield, go managed. Use the managed service. That's the easy move. And then I can see how it gets a lot more complicated depending on your needs. The one thing I think that shouldn't be complicated is actually moving to the cloud. And so are there tools or anything to help make that a smoother process?
Like you said, it shouldn't be. And there are absolutely cases where it is, right? There's totally cases where just moving the data is hard. One of the biggest problems with moving your data is the boilerplate way to do this in a lot of cases is what they call the export import, which is you go to your database, you hit a button, and it dumps all of your data to this giant file. And then on the new instance, you hit import, and it sucks it all into the new one, and you're good to go. That's kind of the old school classic way that you do this stuff. But if you've got terabytes of data, it's kind of tough to do that. And while you're doing the import, well, now what? Unless you shut everyone down and say, okay, no one touched the database, we're doing a migration. Now you've got data that continues to come in while you're importing. So the gap between when you've hit the export button and when you do the import, there's this data that you're missing that you have to catch up still. There's other ways you can do it. You can set up replication between two servers. There's which basically means the current database that you're moving away from, you set up as the primary. You set up a replica and you say, okay, now move all the data over. And it'll do it. It streams it across the pipe. It's kind of a pain to set up. There's a bunch of like little knobs. To make that easier, we've got a service. It's called Database Migration Service, DMS. And that basically handles, it still uses the database native ways to do it. So like, for example, on Postgres, we use PG Logical as the way we do migrations. And it will handle all the connections, all the connectivity. You define a source object or source database in the UI, and then it creates a Cloud SQL instance for you, and then it moves it. Now, keeping in mind, this is only for a managed service. So if you're moving to a managed service, this is the tool to do it. If you want to run your own in a VM, you're kind of on your own because it's not managed for you. So you have to do all of these pieces. You can still do it. There's still ways to set up external replicas and external primary instances to do it. But you're on your own. So DMS is kind of that easy way to move to a managed service.
Okay, that's super cool, because I have definitely lived the try to schedule a window where you can shut everything down with all the people involved and then hope everything works right and you don't have to like revert or whatever thing, and that's hard. So it's nice to know that there's some tools to make that easier now.
So, all right, to summarize what we just learned today, just to recap everything you came and taught, I still want to hold up that my managed databases can and should be used in a lot of instances, but there are other instances where it doesn't make sense to use them, where there's some capability that you need that's not provided yet, or maybe just the way your system is set up. But if you're trying to transfer over, then there's database management system, which makes it a lot smoother of a process. Did I get that?
Exactly. And it all comes down to your requirements, right? Like you said, nothing wrong with running a database in a VM as long as you're comfortable managing it. If you don't want to worry about that, managed services are great.
So if people want to dig in and kind of learn more about this, do you have any recommendations?
Oh, yeah. So, the DMS, the Database Migration Service documentation on our site is a great place to start. There's a lot of good links there. It talks a lot about the strategies that I talked about, and it will lead you into sort of getting comfortable with the idea of moving your data around. For other stuff, like there's a ton of blog posts. We got a lot of blog material on our GCP blog around like managed service versus running your own. What kind of others? Troubleshooting. Like there's a couple ones that are like troubleshooting. I wrote one on connectivity. Like networking is really hard just in general. So I have a good post on networking between different services.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Gabe, for being here. Brian, as always, thank you for being here. And if you're watching at home, leave a comment. Let us know anything new that you've learned or picked up. We definitely check the comments. Thank you so much. That's the end of this one.